You are listening to the Dyslexia Mom Life podcast. I'm Nicole Holcomb, former teacher and school counselor turned civil rights attorney and podcast host. It wasn't that long ago that we learned the reason that our daughter was struggling to learn to read in first grade was dyslexia. Fast forward 4 years past many hours of research and collaborating with experts in the field of dyslexia, now I'm sharing the lessons I have learned that took me from being an overwhelmed mom who didn't understand dyslexia to a go-to mom who is helping hundreds of moms each week through education and collaboration. I created the Dyslexia Mom Life podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies and hacks to help you do the same. If you're feeling alone and lost on your parenting dyslexia journey and you're looking to find a mom who gets it, you're in the right place. Let's jump in and get started. Welcome back to the Dyslexia Mom Life podcast. I'm so glad you're here today. We have a special guest for you, Jeannette Roberes from Barely Articulating. You're going to love the conversation we have today. And of course, it's all about dyslexia, but dyslexia from Jeannette's point of view. She is an author, a speech pathologist, a software engineer, and an educator. Yes, she's worn and does wear many hats, but her passion is really with tech. And I love that she's actually written a book about technology. It's called Technical Difficulties: Why Dyslexic Narratives Matter in Tech. And I'd love for her to come back at some point for us to dig a little deeper into the tech world. But this conversation today, when we called up, we talked all about dyslexia and really how she explains dyslexia from her background as an educator and a speech language pathologist, how she got into her work in dyslexia, and why is it that she spends her time there. I think you're going to find this to be a very interesting conversation that me and Jeannette have together. I know you're going to love the conversation that Jeannette and I have today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. All right. Today I have a special guest with us, Jeannette Roberes. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel very welcome here.
I am just, I'm excited to have you on the show, but I think that the things that I see you doing, I'm just so excited to be following. And the pieces we're going to talk about today, the topics I know are going to be just things that, moms are at that time of the year where there's just some real questions. They're looking for resources, but they're also looking for additional education. Because as you know, a child being identified with dyslexia pops up all throughout the year. It doesn't just happen at one particular time of the year. And so I think this is a very timely time of the year for us to be having this conversation. I love what you're doing with Barely Articulating. That is an amazing name, by the way. Love that. And
thank you.
I look at some of the things that you've done: author, speech language pathologist, software engineer, educator. The list just goes on. And I can't wait to dig into some of that. So if you don't mind, for those who have not yet found Barely Articulating, and we will definitely give all those kudos later, tell our audience just a little bit about you and how you got involved with dyslexia.
To make a long story semi-short, I started working as a speech language pathologist in 2011. And I was working primarily in a school district in Jackson, Mississippi. And let me circle back. It wasn't just a school district. I had about 6 school districts and a daycare or early childhood center that I was working with. So I had probably 90 kids on my caseload. It was crazy. But you know what? During that time, that was 10 years ago, I was fresh and ready to tackle the world. But what I noticed as I was working with students and getting referrals to work with students, that a lot of them were falling in that language-based learning category where the teacher was like, I think it's dyslexia, but I don't know if it's dyslexia. I don't even know what dyslexia is, but I think that's what it possibly could be. And so it was a really questionable time because people were not using that word often, but they were like whispering it like it may be, but I don't know. And so with that in mind, I jumped on to my favorite search engine And I started looking up what is dyslexia, because that's not something we learned explicitly in graduate school as a speech language pathologist. We learned about all the things, but dyslexia and having a specialty in something like that was not one of the things that we learned specifically. So as I started going down this rabbit hole on the search engine, I started to see a lot of those characteristics in the students I was working with. With that in mind, I decided I wanted to level up and get more information from an accredited program and get a couple certificates under my belt so that I can be in the best position to help create interventions for those students who potentially had dyslexia or have dyslexia. During that time, it was really a pivotal time, because that's when legislation in Mississippi changed, and they started to screen kids upon them becoming formally educated so that they would know whether those children were at risk or if they had characteristics that were emerging. So wonderful time. The governor at that time was dyslexic and identified as having dyslexia. So he was really pushing the envelope. And I want to say that was maybe like 2012. But it's certainly something that you can Google.
You know what's so ironic too, because my husband and I talk about this sometimes, is that we were in Mississippi as educators. We moved to Tennessee to teach and work I was working as a school counselor, and then we decided to move to Georgia. And now in 2011, we have a daughter, and then we find out a few years later that she's dyslexic. And I said, who would have known that Mississippi would be ahead of Georgia with their legislation? With, I don't know if you're familiar now, but they even have, my sister-in-laws live there. They have dyslexia scholarships for the Mississippi Department of Ed, where here in Georgia, it's a special needs scholarships, not specific to dyslexia. It has some very specific criteria to, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? To be eligible is the word I'm looking for. But in Mississippi, my sister-in-law was like, we have a scholarship for dyslexia. And I'm not sure if it also helps with like tutoring, because I know where they are at, there's only really one school and it's up in Tennessee. So I'm not sure logistically how that works. But when you said Mississippi, it just took me back for a minute, because I was thinking, who would have thought that they would be on the forefront? But like you said, it's connections, right? Because the governor was able to say, hey, that's me, I'm good with it, but I also see there's a disconnect here. So how can we make sure that we're identifying our children, right? And so that's great to know. So thanks for sharing that piece of your story as well.
Yeah, because you know what? It's important for us to reach back. Once we've made it to this platform that's so esteemed, it's important to reach back. And I think the governor at the time recalled some of the experiences he had as he was matriculating through school. And he saw that this was an opportunity for me to reach back and make sure that children don't suffer like he particularly suffered at that time. So,
well, thank you for giving us a little intro. That's very helpful. Let's just kind of jump into some questions. So the first one, when I think about, how you're working with families and how, I've been on your Instagram page and your Facebook page and just kind of, continue to follow you. I've been following your Instagram page for a while. I love to look at what you have there. You have a lot of great resources, but one of the things I saw on there, I guess led me to this question, because I always think it's interesting to see different ways. And with your background as an SLP, I'm just curious that when a parent or someone asks you, how do you explain dyslexia? Like if you were going to explain it, let's say we have a mom listening that just recently was told your child may be dyslexic, or maybe she just had a psychoeducational done and they said, oh yeah, there's definitely some language issues here. There could possibly be some dyslexia, dysgraphia, all those great, dyslexia sisters. That's what I like to call them. But if someone said, I don't even understand, Jeannette, how do I even understand the word dyslexia? Is there a way that you explain that's more user-friendly that will help people?
So it's a couple different ways. First, we can look at the etymology of the word dyslexia. And we know that dys means difficulty, and lexia is going to mean language and literacy. So that's a way you can kind of break that down easily for people who are visually stimulated by words. I think I am one of those people. So it helps me to recall that information. However, I like to explain it by saying, it's a combination of characteristics. And I talk about the different impacts that it has on language, on speech, on listening, on comprehension, and how that all kind of ties into the bigger picture. So that's how I explain it, because I want them to know that not only does it look different for each person, but it impacts different avenues or different core tenets of who we are. Our ability to speak, our ability to listen, our ability to use language and comprehend language. So I kind of break it up into chunks, and people are able to see how dyslexia can really be a game changer in so many ways. And they're like, oh, now I know why this has been occurring, or now I know why that, or, even the idea of a dyslexic learner having the language and not being able to utilize it like in that impromptu manner. Like you may ask a question and they have the answer available, but it's really hard to articulate it. So I like them to think of it as almost like a spectrum. There are going to be different things on that spectrum that are going to be impacted in different ways, but it's just important that all of these core tenets.
And I love too, recently someone was talking about, if you've met one dyslexic, congratulations, you've met one dyslexic, right? Because they're just like our kids. They are our children, but with dyslexics, to me, a lot of it's so invisible, right? It's not a difference or a disability you can readily see. And so I think that's why sometimes they do have, and we'll talk about this probably in a little bit, but, maybe not really labeled, but maybe someone may look at them and say, what's taking them so long, right? Yes. Because they can't see how they're processing it and how long it's taking. And our daughter, even as early as pre-K, now that I look back, I'm like, oh, those were some signs I didn't know, right? I didn't know to look for them. And even early on, 2.5, we were doing speech articulation.
Okay.
And she had speech services for a number of years. And I can remember early on, our Orton Gillingham tutor, we didn't know she was OG trained at the time. We didn't know what that was, to be honest. But she was our reading specialist at the school my daughter was in pre-K at. And she's like, I can't tell. She didn't ever say at the beginning dyslexia. She's like, something is there, but the speech kept getting in the way. And so it wasn't until first grade that we were able to really pull that apart. But it started when she was about 2.5. And even now she'll say to me, you'll probably appreciate this with your background. She'll say to me, can I ask you a question? And I'll look at my husband, Chris, and be like, why didn't she just ask me? Like, why does she? And then we went to the Atlanta Speech School and had some evaluations done. And I was like, oh, I get it now. Her brain needs to process. So she's like, hey, can I ask you a question? Then it gives her brain a minute to catch up, I'm assuming. And so she had another phrase years ago that she would use when she would want to ask me something. And I was always like, I'm very open. Like you could ask me anything, I'd answer. I'm a very open person, very, approachable. And so but I learned
just
that
gives her that opportunity to process that information. And it's so needed. And I think as we're getting older, we're starting to all need a little more time with processing information. So
yes, my hand is up. Yes.
So we have to give them grace. We have to give ourselves grace. And hey, I think even to go a little deeper, the pandemic has really been able to bring a lot of surface views to some of these invisible disabilities that we all may potentially possess. So I know you said that it's invisible. And obviously, I think our government system has mainly worked with people that have disabilities you can see, so when this has come into purview, it's like, man, now we have to allocate some additional time to figure out how we can work through these differences, these neurodivergent learning styles that exist as well. So yeah, it's
absolutely. And it's ironic because you say that, and the first thing I think of as a former educator is I think about, the data is there. We see it in the reporting of, where our kids are falling behind, where they can't, the reading gap and things of that nature. And it's like, it's there. Let's just pull it back and look. So that's obviously a different conversation for a different time, but circling back to the invisible differences, and again, for the audience, what we're talking about here is, a disability or a difference that you can't see by just looking at someone. As you spend time with children, you learn if they're not able to spell and things like that. A teacher may be able to pick up on these things, but just, you walk into a grocery store and someone sees your child, they're not going to say, oh, they're dyslexic. Like it's not visible to people. But I think also, I've talked about this in the podcast before. I think as parents, we're doing a lot of invisible parenting. There are a lot of things behind the closed doors that we're doing that people aren't seeing, our families aren't seeing, our friends aren't seeing. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle to parent in general. But as you start parenting children, especially neurodiverse children, it just looks, and my child looks different than a friend will call me and say, we're experiencing this at our house. And I'm like, well, I'm not experiencing that, but let's talk through what you're experiencing and see how we can tackle that. So I think communication is a big part of that, having that tribe and that group and people that support you, but also having that communication with the people that are supporting your children as well, because they might not realize that homework is taking 2 hours and the teacher thought it should only take 20 minutes. So having that communication piece is important as well.
I think teachers are starting to really see exactly what's going on in a lot of the households, and starting to understand what's going on in their pupils' heads. Because now that dyslexia is a word, and we're saying that, it has certainly brought a lot of attention to the possibilities. I was reading that statistically, 80% of IEPs are of students who have dyslexia. And a lot of the provisions that are being provided within states vary. We talked earlier about what they're doing in Mississippi compared to what they're doing in Georgia. And I currently live in Michigan, and they are not doing a whole lot here. So it varies, but I do think that this is a time of awakening, and a lot of us are starting to see that we need to get behind more learning, more professional education that will help pivot us. Because I always think that while teachers are trained in instruction, SOPs are trained in intervention. And we're looking at how we can all work together and get across this finish line. And that finish line may look different from you. It may be that your child can proficiently read and that child can comprehend, and then for someone else, it may be something else. So I think that this is hard work. I love how you said, the community, basically, tapping into some of your like-minded peers or families that have similar situations. I know that way back before probably you and I were born, they would often say it takes a community or a village to raise a child. My mom has stories about if she was being disobedient or disruptive in school, how her neighbor would get involved. And how other people were like, hey, we gonna make sure you on the right path, sister girl.
Watch it out for you. Yeah. And I think too, going back to this will kind of date us a bit for people that listen to the podcast later, but the pandemics, people have experienced it at this point. So I think one of the things, though, two things that I think came out of that were positive. One was that families realized you could do things like we're doing. We're having a Zoom audio video here for those that can't see us, but for those that are listening on the podcast. So we're able to connect. And I think now that's kind of broken the barrier for families to know if they don't have resources in their community, they're able to reach out and they feel more comfortable, and the students feel more comfortable because we went through that piece of virtual learning for pretty much everybody. And then the other part is, we maybe even for the first time had to sit around the kitchen table with our children and teach our own children and really see where they were struggling, and really for maybe for the first time for some families, they were able to, maybe appreciate's a strong word, but I'm an educator. My husband's an educator. I've got lots. So, but to really appreciate that, there are a number, 24, 28, 32, whatever children in a classroom. And when you're working individually with your child, of course you have that barrier of the parent had and the teacher had at the same time during the pandemic. But I think it gave families an opportunity, is my point, to really see where their child's strengths were and where their children were really struggling, and be able to go back, hopefully, and have some really productive conversations with schools about, yes, I see that. Let me tell you what I saw at home, where the teachers say, can you try this at home? This would help support the classroom. And I get there's a lot of clashing with people and districts, but I really try to work with families to figure out how can we get past that, because it's really in your child's best interest when we as adults all work together to help your child be successful. And if they're in education, it should be their focus. I'm not going to say it's everybody's focus, because you've got people in all professions that probably should be other places. However, I have found when I go into meetings, if I start the meeting off with, we're all here for the best interest of X, right? Whatever your child's name is. And if we all keep focused on that, including the parent, then the blame game drops and we actually can get somewhere. Yeah. And so I love those pieces as well. So
we can certainly get stuck in the blame game. We can also get stuck in passing the torch to this person because we don't know enough about this particular topic, and we don't even want to like touch it with a 10-foot pole. So we're like, I'm going to pass it on to you. So almost like passing and passing and passing. I've had exchanges with like phone companies. Let's say when I called Comcast and I said, hey, I'm having some issues with my cable. And then they'll say, oh, let me put you in touch with this person. And then you get on the phone with that person and they say, oh, that's not my department. Let me put you in touch with this person. And by the time you get to the person that's supposed to help you, you're just completely overwhelmed and stressed and irritated and frustrated and all the things. So I do like the fact that you go into meetings and you are saying, hey, we're here for X. Let's get to the solution, because we can talk about the problems all day long, but that is not going to get us closer to the solution.
Right. So you're so right there. And I want to just emphasize that for a minute. For those of you who are new to the podcast and your child's just in the stages of being evaluated, or maybe you've got a recent evaluation and you're looking at or staying in a public school system, then there is that eligibility meeting that you have where you are having real discussions about where your child is currently. What we're talking about now, though, is once you have a path you're on with your child, is talking about progress. How are we making progress? How are we monitoring progress? And really working together as a team is what we're talking about now. So just in case some of you are new to the process, we get that it is a process. So we want to share that as well. I did want to ask you another question, though, as I think about some of the questions, moms have. Another question I think is good to hear from your perspective is, and I know this can kind of be, we can kind of go off. It could take a minute, I guess, is what I'm going to say here to explain this, but maybe hitting some highlights, because I think it's important for people to understand, okay, now my child's been identified with dyslexia, but I don't understand the piece I'm asking you about now is the phonological awareness that our children have to be able to be successful readers. Can you talk a little bit about I can't even pronounce that today. Phonological aware, and it's a big word, evidently. It's really not, but it is long though.
It is a definitely a long multi-syllabic word. So
I might need more caffeine, evidently.
Some of us can get a little tongue-tied in saying it. Phonological awareness is an individual's awareness or appreciation of the sound structure of words. So phono meaning sound. So that's what we want to make sure we are tapping into. I was talking about etymology earlier, and then awareness, that's about the knowing and the being cognizant of. So phonological awareness is definitely important because it is a reliable indicator of later reading ability. And we've seen time and time again, the statistics show that when you have a good grasp of phonological awareness, then you will be able to be a successful reader. Now, when we're talking about phonological awareness, I want you all to imagine an umbrella, and there are going to be certain things that fall up under that umbrella. We have listening. And when we're talking about listening, we want to specifically talk about whether a child knows the difference between the sounds that they're hearing. Then we want to tap into alliteration. Alliteration is all about whether a child knows the sounds at the beginning of the words. Do these words begin with the same sound? Let's say you were talking about cat and car. Do those two words have the same sounds at the beginning? And the child being aware of whether they do. We look at rhyming, which goes without saying. Blending. Can you blend these sounds to make this particular word, or can you blend these words together, or well, not necessarily words, usually just the sounds, because again, we're talking about phono, we're talking specifically about those segments within the word. So can you blend this word back together? You can pull those different sounds apart and ask the child to do that. We're looking at syllables. A lot of times when we are working within the Orton-Gillingham structure, we're talking all about multisensory, and that's using all of your senses or multiple senses to tap into this particular learning goal. So if we're talking about syllables, then maybe clapping out the syllables or tapping out the syllables of that particular word. And then segmentation. Can you break these words apart by sounds? So again, phonological awareness is all about listening, alliteration, rhyming, syllables, segmentation, and blending. Tons and tons of information that, maybe a domestic engineer, AKA work from home, or a mom that is committed to just being a house mom or raising children and not necessarily working an additional job, they may not have that training. They may not know how to do those specific things as it relates to phonological awareness. Again, that's when that community comes in. That's when that quick Google search comes in. That's when it's appropriate to start tapping into your network and saying, hey, does anybody know maybe a first grade teacher that I could, have a conversation with about these things? Think about the phrase, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So you want to make sure if you are seeing things that are like, well, my other child was able to pick up on reading a little quicker, or my child is losing their language, or they're having a really, really hard time with like rhyming words when I'm reading to them at night. And you want to definitely start tapping into your network. Is nothing to be ashamed of. I think that the sooner you get assistance, the better, because that falls into the early intervention category. Right. They say if you know sooner, then you can really set that pathway forward for your child to be, academically in a great place as they're matriculating through school.
Right. And I can remember too, early on in like kindergarten, first grade, we were trying to learn sight words, and our daughter would know them. We'd be good. And then Thursday night we would be studying again and she wouldn't know any of them. I'm like, and I would get frustrated because I didn't know she had dyslexia. And I'm like, you knew them on Tuesday. And then we would both end up in the floor crying because we couldn't learn these sight words. And then
your poor husband looking like,
right. He's like, I don't know what's going on over there. I teach high school, so y'all on your own. But yeah, so, and I have an undergrad in elementary ed, and I was still, it'd been a minute, but I had been a school counselor and all those things, but it's different, right? When you're working with your own child. But I was like, what is going on? I don't understand. And the teacher at the time was like, oh, it should just kind of click. And it didn't. And so that I love what you were saying. I also want to add to that, which is, also be a little cautious, because as you're getting into this world of reading, you also will have teachers saying, oh yeah, I've taught reading for 20 years, but how have they taught reading? So like you were saying, your network of people with, who has some knowledge. One of the people I would say is, we mentioned a moment ago about Orton Gillingham. OG tutors is what a lot of us talk about. And it's really finding a qualified tutor who is familiar with teaching reading to children who are dyslexic. It's not okay just to say, in my opinion anyway, my professional opinion, just to say I'm trained to teach reading. I'm trained to teach reading in my undergrad, but I am not trained to teach my daughter what she needs to be able to decode, to be able to be a reader who's dyslexic. And so I think, I was thinking when you were talking a while ago about, multisensory, I immediately thought of, when you literally have a little plastic box at home with sand in it and your child's, using their fingers to do the letters or the sounds and things. And, when you have that network, like you were talking about, and they can give you as a parent things that you can do at home that can supplement school. And it's not you, doing their job. It is helping your child learn. And one of the things I talked about, I've kind of added recently to for people to be thinking about is it's important for our children, even as young as they are, it starts with us. Let me go back. It starts with us knowing our child's learning profile. That sounds real fancy, but all that is, where are our child's strengths and where are they struggling? And if you have a struggling reader on your hands, what can you do to support your child? I'm a very visual learner. I like to see things. You talked about that a minute ago. I like to circle, highlight things. My husband laughs because in law school, I had a highlight color for everything when I was reading. And I just have a certain way I do things. I don't think my daughter is visual. I think she's auditory. Like we can read a book. She has very high comprehension. She may have some visual, but I think she's more of an auditory learner. So I say that to say, as we are working with our community and our tribe to help with our children, we have to help and kind of figure out that learner profile. So as our kids get older, they can self-advocate and they can say, absolutely, I'm dyslexic and this is how it impacts me. I need extended time. Or you may find that it takes me a little longer to do my math problems. I'm going to get them right, but it takes me a little longer, right? So and I think it starts at home, having those conversations and being comfortable having those conversations. It's interesting what you said a moment ago, because I was in a Facebook group one time where they were doing something like this, doing like a vlog or whatever. And I never will forget, it was a teacher, it was an educator. And she said, you know what? I just dropped my kid off at school. It's their responsibility to educate them. Wow. And the hairs all over stood up, because I was like, I get that, but I don't get that, right? Because like you were saying a few minutes ago, it's all of us working together. I believe it's me as a mom, and it's my personal responsibility to provide what I can.
We are co-parenting with our teachers.
Right. We are a team. And when we come at it as a collaborative team, again, for those of you that are running into maybe situations where it's not, think back to our own education. We had years where we had amazing teachers, and we had years where our personalities just didn't mix. But when we go in positive, like you were saying, and we really have real conversations, I think we can go a long way. So why I want to talk about phonological, I can't say it again, awareness was really so when moms are working at home with their children, or they're helping with homework, or maybe maybe they've got an audio book and the child's listening. There's opportunities there to have conversations about language, and you don't have to call it that. You can, hey, how did you say that again? Let's try that again. And you can work together on that. And some kids are really open to that. Some kids are not, but you just have to find your opportunities. You're definitely not alone. There is definitely lots of support and lots of people like yourself that have knowledge that really want to give back and work with communities of families. But there's also, to me, that part of that responsibility of, I feel like I'm kind of in the driver's seat, right? Like I am my child's best advocate. I know her better than anyone else other than probably her dad. And I know what works and doesn't work. I'm constantly learning though, right? As a parent, just having the parenting hat without the dyslexia, I'm constantly learning from her. And it's an amazing journey. But I also know that I have to decide what detours we're taking. I have to decide which highway we're taking as a family. And I have to figure out, like, where do I need to make pit stops to get help and ask directions? That's okay. You got to do that. Or you could be by yourself and completely lost and not show up at your destination. That's not okay.
Yeah. You dropped a lot of gems there. First, I want to honor us by saying, parents are the first teachers. So we're teaching the decorum. We are teaching the different diverse viewpoints, and we're teaching about inclusivity. That is what we're doing before they even hit the classroom. Second, it is in your best interest as a parent to make sure you have an open dialogue and open communication with the teacher so that you two are on the same page. The page is we're trying to get baby X to be able to read before he leaves this grade and transitions to the next grade. Because as we know, certain districts have provisions in place where they're if the child cannot read by third grade, that child is going to stay in that particular grade. So just keeping it super professional. We're all striving for the very same outcome. You said a whole bunch of great stuff. So I'm trying to.
I was kind of on a soapbox there. Sorry about that. I'm very passionate, obviously, about this topic and just about, and two, I see it from both angles. Like I'm a civil rights attorney, so I see when people are so frustrated and they file OCR complaints. I manage those. And so I see that frustration, but then I've also been in a school building as an educator. My husband's a current educator. I've got family members who are teachers, and I've also been a school counselor in many IEP meetings. And I think back now and think, oh, I wish I had known then what I know now, right? And I think the biggest obstacle I saw, I don't want to say obstacle, but I think where our children got stuck was when the adults couldn't get past things, and so the child ended up, kind of being stuck in the middle. But I didn't mean to go off on a tangent about that.
No.
I do want to switch gears though, because I know you had some thoughts too, but let's switch gears and we can circle back if we have a second, because this is another topic I'm very passionate about. And I wanted to spend more time here, but we'll see. We may have to jump back in and do another episode at some point. Technology. I love technology. And I know that you wrote a book, Technical Difficulties. So look, I can't even talk now. Technical Difficulties, Why Dyslexic Narratives Matter in Tech. Yes. I would love to talk more about, I know you're a software engineer as well. You're this author with this amazing bank of expertise. And so I would love to talk about when you think about, and I think that goes along with the pandemic, right, too, because we're at a point where there's so much tech coming out so quick. We as parents can't keep up with it, to be quite frank. But then the other piece of it is, it's not like I didn't get a computer, and this is going to date me. I didn't have a computer that I took to school, until I went to law school. When I went to law school, I took a laptop to my classes with me and I took notes on my laptop. But I think about my child. I mean, she already has an iPad. She already has, opportunities at school to get on computer. I'm like, she just has a different skill set, right? But I think about how blessed, if you will, for our kids to be growing up right now when they have access to all these amazing pieces. And as parents, it's a little overwhelming, right? To figure out what's the best app for this or what not to, or to expose them to. But I know you've spent a lot of time working in this area as well. So I love that you've got all these different nuggets that we can talk about. But let's talk a little bit about, we can talk about the book too, if you want, but really talking about, how do you see technology play in that role with supporting dyslexics? And how can we as parents kind of tap into some of that?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And I want to make sure I address the fact that as our children are digital natives, we need to be very cognizant of their learning profiles. As you stated earlier, we need to know their interests. We need to know their preferences as it relates to their use of technology. Another thing you said, and I want to talk about this really quickly, but I'm going to pivot, is asking the right questions when it comes to getting that additional support. We can all hop on Google and use that as our means of connecting to everything digitally. But if we're looking for tutors, we're looking for assistance and support, we do need to formulate the right questions so that we know the person we're working with is qualified to help us get our child to that next level. It also makes me question, tons of things as it relates to technology, because it makes everything almost so accessible to us. It's right at our doorsteps. Absolutely. We want to make sure that as we are tapping into, and that's our word of the hour, tapping into that assistive technology, which is basically technology used for people who have some specific disabilities, and it comes in a tremendous variety. We have teachers that are using assistive technology in the classroom, and we have students that are using it at home. Assistive technology can be anything from a pair of glasses that you have to a walking stick that someone has. And you might say, wow, that's interesting. I never would have put that in that, assistive technology umbrella or bubble. But some great ones that I will say, it's all really trial and error. We have tons of speech to text tools. We have tons of text to speech software and tools that exist. And it's really about just trying these different devices, these different apps, and seeing what works best for you. What is a common denominator I find is that people love audibles. They're loving the idea of something taking that extra stress, that extra burden off of them or their child who is learning to comprehend. So they're not focused on sounding out those words and blending and segmenting. They're just listening and they're understanding exactly what's happening. Another one, as I mentioned, is going to be that speech to text, where you are just speaking those different phrases, those different sentences are coming out, and it is spelling that for you with just distinct eloquence. You no longer have to trip over the spelling of a word. How do I spell this? Because to this day, I am still struggling with words. I just found out yesterday how to spell segue. And I use segue so often. And when I saw the actual spelling of it, I was like, I've been spelling it Segway. And it was when I found out that it was spelled so differently, I was like, excuse me. So
I was just about to say, even adults could do the speech to text is helpful in trying to figure out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So segue is spelled Segue. And I absolutely positively did not know
not spelling it that way.
Who knew there was a U in there?
Right. It's not the way it sounds. Yeah.
So assistive technology is going to make sure you are getting things done efficiently and it is meeting you where you are. Some of the things.
Can I ask you a question too? Because I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I think my daughter's in private schools. She's in a private dyslexia school, but I know many people listening are in the public school systems. And if I recall right from a previous interview and just previous experience, when a parent gets to that point that they need that, they can even ask for an assistive technology eval, right? Specifically to determine what it is now there are private people that are doing that for people as a service, but you can also ask for it within your school district free of charge, where if you're really struggling to figure out, there are, like you said, lots of great Audible and lots of great things as far as audio and lots of resources. But if you too want to kind of narrow it to what works best, you can. Obviously, it's going to be some trial and error, like you said, but you can also ask for that evaluation, or ask when you go do a reevaluation to get some of those pieces that might be helpful, that matches, like you were saying, with the learner profile.
I would highly suggest to write a letter, make it plain, and usually keeping that paper trail is definitely going to get you the accommodations that you will see fit for your child. Write a letter to the school and say that you would be interested in looking at some assistive technology that can help your child. A lot of schools have them already available to the child, but they just don't advertise it. And so by you saying, hey, we need some technology that it's going to complement the strengths that my child currently has, that will open the door, and they may say, hey, we have this available and we have that available. A lot of things aren't usually just advertised. I don't know if schools don't want to talk about it. They don't want people to overuse them or misuse them. But usually, again, that closed mouth is not going to get what it needs.
Thank you. And tell us in a nutshell who your book is for, your technical difficulties, why dyslexic narratives matter in tech? Like if I'm a parent, I'll be honest, I haven't read it yet, but after looking, I didn't realize you had a book, and I was researching for our interview. I looked at it on Amazon as well, and we'll put a link in the show notes for those who may want to check it
Thank
out as
you.
well. And I was like, oh, this looks like something I would really be interested in reading as a parent. But who was your audience for the book when you
So
wrote
my
it?
audience for the book would be those who have been diagnosed with dyslexia and they are looking for work. We often think about dyslexia in a vacuum, and we're always thinking about dyslexic children, dyslexic kids, and what are early identifiers of dyslexia. But we don't often think that dyslexics become adults. And when they become adults, they are looking for gainful employment. We know that intellectually they are either at or above their peers. So this book is an inspiratory guide, and it provides tons of insight along conscious bias, tokenism, anything in between ADHD, that particular comorbidity that we're seeing often. And it just talks about how you can advocate for yourself and how you can create opportunities within the tech sector for yourself. Because I know I mentioned I was working primarily within that dyslexia scope when I lived in Mississippi, but I didn't say when I moved to Michigan, I started working in tech. So I started looking at ways where I can bridge the two. I did tons of conferences in about 40 different countries. Actually,
Wow.
in 2019 and 2018, I was like traveling like crazy. I looked at my Google stats and it said that I had traveled the globe 3 times that year. So with that in mind,
You
I
were a
was
busy
doing,
lady that year, those years.
I was doing a lot of talks to tech
Yeah, bring awareness
professionals
to it. Yeah.
and industries, because again, we often see these dyslexic children, but we do not fathom the idea of them becoming dyslexic adults. And so when they become adults,
Mm-hmm.
it's important that we create a bridge so that they can find employment and that they can use those strengths, those gifts that we call them, and use those to make a more expansive technology industry. As you know, tech is growing. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
NFTs and crypto now. We
Right.
need some dyslexics at that table,
That's
and we
right.
need them using that out of the box thinking and the
Mm-hmm.
perceptual reasoning that they're bringing so that they can help
Yeah.
expand
Well, you'd
this
love this.
field.
We recently added, I guess that's a way to do more conversations about investing in things. And it's something I didn't have growing up. And we started our daughter with a debit card through Greenlight where we could put her allowance. And what was interesting about that is it has an investment piece for kids, and it teaches kids about investing. And what is so cool, she can invest for $1, like
Wow.
as little as $1. And we're
Mhm.
talking ETF stocks. Like she picked out
Come on.
Microsoft. What else did she pick out? She picked out Microsoft
Wow.
primarily because of Minecraft. She's like, oh yeah, people are doing Minecraft. They're gonna be there's gonna, and so
I love
so we
that.
had conversations. Got great. I mean, this is not like an infomercial for that, but I found that it could be. We'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, so but just saying though that she really started asking a lot of questions. And I looked at my husband, I was like, she's got this kind of mind. Like, this is the way she thinks. She's a numbers
Yes.
person. She's very analytical, but math and science is her thing. And I was like, see, but that goes to what you're saying. I was thinking about when you were talking about your book is that although it almost sounds like, a high school or a college kid would be good to read that age wise,
Absolutely.
I'm also thinking as a parent, I have a parent of a fifth grader who thinks she wants to be a chemist, but she also has other passions and would like to be an entrepreneur. And I'm thinking your book would be great for a parent to read, just to think about opportunities, because so often we get trapped in, and I have to do this too some
We're
days.
pigeonholed and we feel
Yeah,
like,
or
oh,
you
my
have the
child won't be
sky's
able to do
falling
anything.
today because she had a bad morning, right? And so I think it's good. One of the things I try to do on the podcast is let parents know there's a life beyond this, right? Like there's hope. Your child is going to be successful because you're here listening. I know you're invested in your child, or you wouldn't have made it this long into this particular episode. And so I love to bring resources, but I love what you shared about your book, that it's really talking about the world of tech, and it does look so different. We know we don't even know what it's going to look like 10 years, 20 years from now for our kids.
Don't.
But I think as a parent, even reading the book, if we have small, like my daughter's younger, I don't know that it's something she would want us to read together because I don't have a copy yet. But even as a parent, because I am in a different generation coming up from tech, it sounds like it would be a good thing even just to have an awareness of that. So I'm excited about getting it and diving in. Yeah.
I talk about tons of jobs that will be available, like the cloud architect and AI specialists. Mm-hmm. These jobs will exist and the tech industry is growing. We need to make sure that we are positioning our children to be able to get in on that overflow, that abundance, because regardless if they are dyslexic or autistic, or if they have any other challenge that they're working through, their voice is significant. And if we don't create tech around individuals who are different, who have these neurodiversities, then we're just going to have one-sided technology and it's just going to work for one group of people. And where's the accessibility really in that? So
absolutely. I love that. I wish you would, now going back, I wish we'd spent more time talking about this. I love tech stuff. So we may come back and dive. Actually, after I read the book, I may have some questions. So we may have to do a follow-up episode and really dig into the book. So let me ask you one last question, because I know people got many things they're doing and you as well. I'm going to ask you a question. I usually ask one question at the end of my podcast, but I'm going to start changing it up for people. So y'all that have been listening, y'all gonna be like, that's not what she usually asks. Anyway, I want to know, what is the best mom hack that you are using? What are you doing to save time? What are you using to be productive? Tell us. I'm always interested to learn new things. So tell me what you're using. What hack are you using right now that's working for you?
A couple things. So getting up super early is one thing. I'm up early.
Hey, I'm trying to read that 5 a.m. club book. Somebody on Instagram or Facebook said, read this book. I'm not a morning person. I'm like, why did I get a book that says 5 a.m.? I don't even want to see the clock at 5 a.m. But there's a 5 a.m. club. Evidently, I'm reading the book. We'll see how it goes. So I am in awe that you say that you get up early. Yeah. So
I'm an early bird. And then I try to create schedules. I mean, my day is pretty flexible, but I have like things that have to be done that day. Like I make my son do Duolingo so that he can become proficient in another language. Like regardless of what's happening, that's getting done every single day. So I think having those like must do's every day, and then getting up early, because when I'm up early, it's quiet and I can hear and think.
I love that. And I say I'm not a morning person, but I do find and my husband laughs because he's like, you jump out of the bed, you start running. He's got like 2 cups of coffee. It's going to be like an hour into the day. And I'm like, you still sitting? What's going on? I've already done like 15 things. But I will say this though, the days that I get up and I give myself a little buffer, I don't feel as hurried. I do feel like my day is calmer. Yes. Even if it's 10, 15 minutes, right? Like if I just take a few minutes to myself, have a cup of water, just kind of like think about, look at my planner, what I got kind of going on for the day.
Get your mind right.
Yeah.
That's what we call it.
Yeah. Just get my mind right. I love that. I'm going to use that for the quote for the thing. Get my mind right. But because it makes all the difference, as opposed to, I am exactly guilty. I got my hand up that I do a lot of times though, hit that snooze and jump right out of bed. I know that's not good, but that's just how I roll sometimes.
I just can't do the rushing. The rushing really stresses me out.
It makes a difference, right? It does. It makes a difference. So I'm glad that you're reminding me of these things.
Yes.
2022, right? We got to remind ourselves on how we can be healthier and take care of ourselves. It's still January.
You got time.
Right? I just started, right? So I can still keep reading that 5 a.m. club book. Maybe it'll click. I don't know. All right. Well, I'm so glad that you shared those things. I look forward to, sharing all these nuggets in the show notes. If somebody's like, "Ooh, I got to jump right off this podcast app and find her," where would they go, ma'am, to find you and connect with you?
Yes, please do find me. Okay.
So tell them where to find you, and we'll put it in the show notes. But
you can find me across almost every and any social media platform by searching Barely Articulating. And that's going to be BEARLY, like an actual bear, Barely Articulating.
I love it. I'm telling you, I love it.
And I'm on Tumblr, Pinterest, Twitter, TikTok now. So mainly any platform.
So I found you on Instagram, which is kind of where I've been landing lately. I don't know why. That's just kind of been my go-to place to go recently. And probably because I just love all the visual pieces, right? Because I'm such a visual learner. corner.
Yeah,
But that's where I found you.
Instagram.
You have lots of great nuggets there. But so sounds
Thank
like
you.
pretty much anywhere you go for your social, they can find you there and start following you and following your
Yes.
tips. She's got some great tips out there and just some really good content out there that will help break apart and explain some things, especially if you're new to dyslexia and you're trying to figure it all out and you're trying to figure out the advocacy pieces. And, there's just a lot of pieces that we didn't even get to cover today, but, we wanted to hit the highlights on. I was really interested. Yeah. I was really interested in having you on the show to talk more about, from your background about how you explain things to parents and others that are asking, and then, just rallying around the tech piece. Like I said, I do think we'll come back and do another episode on the tech stuff because I'd like to dig more into that. But, time is what it is. So we got to keep moving. But Jeannette, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. I look forward to us continuing to collaborate and support one another. Just thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I hope everyone is able to grab some gems and nuggets from our exchange.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for listening today. If you want to learn more about dyslexia and raising a child with dyslexia, head over to dyslexiamomlife.com for more dyslexia resources. If you want more support or to chat about this episode, come join me and other amazing moms in our private Facebook group, Dyslexia Mom Life Podcast Community. Be sure to introduce yourself to the group. Have a great week, and remember, you got this.